The left are constantly telling those of us on the right how much more kind, understanding and compassionate they are than we are. I don't see it. On the left, I see people who are far too quick to judge others, far too simplistic in their analyses of current events and social issues, far too simplistic in their analysis of COVID and the response, and far too closed-minded and arrogant. G'day and welcome to episode 66 of The Other Side with Damian Coory, your dose of sanity from a sensible classical liberal centre-right perspective. In a moment, we'll try to answer the question, who are the real journalists? What is a real journalist? It seems those who think they are, aren't. And those who say they aren't, just might be. But first, what a horrible week it's been. I just didn't think it could get any worse for civil liberties in Australia. But now we have politicians flip-flopping on opening up the country, everything hinging on this Friday's meeting of the National Cabinet, or as I like to call it, the Australian PoliBard, our very own one-party system, the Lib Lab Coalition Party Room meeting, where they will debate not whether to lock us down and take away most of our basic rights and freedoms in a massively disproportionate response to COVID, but how long they're going to lock us down for and take away our rights in a massively disproportionate response to COVID. Remember what we said last week. This has nothing to do with the pandemic. We're being locked down because of a failure of our state and federal governments to properly prepare our hospitals and our nursing resources for a surge in cases and deaths that they have known was coming for more than 18 months. This is utterly inexcusable, Australia. And it's evidence that when left to government, the best outcomes will not occur. We should have had a combination of government and private sector experts from business working on this issue, because government is just incapable of getting fast results, because leaders in government don't have to be accountable every single day like those in business do to customers under the threat of real-time competition. Politicians and government are accountable once every 3 to 4 years in elections that are about many, many things. It simply isn't enough. And when we have a national crisis like this, you really get to see how big government costs lives. So now more people will die from COVID, and we've had to be in and out of lockdowns for 2 years, which has also undoubtedly killed or will kill thousands of people who couldn't get treatment or couldn't get diagnosis early enough for other things. Not to mention all the avoidable misery these lockdowns and border closures have brought to families, businesses, and people generally. The weaknesses of our country's recent descent into nanny-state big government wokeness over the past 10 to 20 years are finally coming to the fore. For God's sake, Australia, let's learn the lessons this time. In Melbourne this week, police fired on protesters. This is a mark of policing failure. Success is when violence is avoided and protests are managed with respect to people's right to protest and vent their concerns. That's what a liberal democracy is all about. There have simply been too many cases of police behaving badly this past year or so. And Victoria in particular seems to have a real cultural crisis in its force. A big enough cultural crisis, I think, to warrant the removal of the police commissioner in that state. He's failed. Especially when something like this can happen on his watch. And I warn viewers, this video is a bit graphic, so you might want to jump ahead 60 seconds if you're sensitive.
Oh!
Now, for those of you listening on the podcast who haven't seen this viral video, it's of a police officer coming up from behind a man who's just standing at the Flinders Street Station concourse, apparently having a calm conversation with another police officer. And the police officer comes up from behind and violently throws him to the ground. The bang you heard appears to be of the victim's head hitting the concrete ground. Lovely. Reports from numerous witnesses on social media say the victim woke up in a pool of his own blood and urine, calling for his mum. I hope and pray that he doesn't have brain damage, said one post on YouTube. Indeed. Prominent Melbourne lawyer Jeremy King, who specialises in representing clients in police misconduct cases, told Melbourne's Herald Sun newspaper he was shocked by the footage, which he found sickening. King said this is what is known as a sling tackle. But since the other police officer the victim was talking to wasn't doing anything, this indicates that he wasn't posing a threat. The matter is being investigated by Victoria Police's Professional Standards Command, and the Victorian Police Chief Commissioner, Shane Patton, told Radio 3AW, "We won't jump to any conclusions. There's always context." Yeah, there's context, all right. You're the context. Your leadership style, your management approach, your politicisation of your police force. That's the context, Mr. Patton. The investigation is ongoing and we will be keeping an eye on it. If you know the victim or have any information about his well-being, please do let us know. In times of stress, parody is powerful at putting a spotlight on hypocrisy, and there's been some very powerful parody art happening on social media this week that says more than words ever could. This excellent piece from PoliBard takes a Victorian police anti-violence ad campaign and gives it a new, sobering twist. Watch.
The 25th of November is the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women and signals the start of 16 days of activism against gender-based violence.
Anyone can be a victim of abuse. However, the overwhelming majority of family violence and sexual offences are perpetrated by men against women and children. And this has been a year that has impacted those in vulnerable situations more than ever. Across the community, many people from all cultures don't feel safe and respected within their family or relationship. This is simply unacceptable.
Police are at the front line of this community crisis, protecting the many brave women and children that come forward, seeking our help and holding perpetrators to account. Victoria Police plays a leadership role in this. Like all good practice, it begins by looking at ourselves. This means ensuring our workforce understands and upholds the values and behaviours that create a safe, inclusive and gender equal workplace.
Victoria Police commit to working hand in hand with the community to end violence against women and children and making the community and our organisation a safer place.
Very powerful stuff from the Victorian artist PoliBard there. As was this one from Deactivist, who took Scott Morrison's virtual video speech on the weekend to the UN General Assembly. He took that video and he added some recent news footage to it. Again, apologies to our podcast listeners, you can't see this, but the links are in the program notes. In the meantime, you can listen to 90 seconds of the PM speech anyway. And you can probably imagine the footage that's being overlaid on the video.
We are a proud liberal democracy. We believe in a world order that favours freedom and that supports the dignity and free expression of all people. We believe in human rights, in gender equality and the rule of law, and we back that up with how we pursue these things in our own country, in our own society, and how we raise our own children. Australia was one of 8 countries only involved in the drafting of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and we continue to strengthen the international human rights system. And we will continue to raise our voice on important issues like the rights of women and girls, the rights of Indigenous peoples, because respecting the rights and freedoms of the individual is intrinsically important. It is fundamental to our values as a people and as a nation. It lifts all societies and nations too, delivering better outcomes through economic inclusion.
So if you get vaccinated, there will be special rules that apply to you.
Women's empowerment, environmental sustainability, rising living standards and so much more. Australians' actions are guided by our belief in the inherent dignity of all people, everywhere, no matter the circumstances. Mr. President, we learned through the pandemic that every moment of challenge requires us to think anew, to engage with each other, to learn as you go. It is an experience understood by many others. And so we will continue to meet this moment with dialogue. Thank you, Mr. President.
Another good one from Deactivist on YouTube, and just after that went viral, according to Deactivist, the video was demonetized by YouTube, which means any pittance that Google's YouTube might have thrown at them for all the views that it's brought them and their advertisers will not be going to Deactivist. Amazing. Now, I'm not sure what's appalled me more this past week. The fact that we've got police who look like military commandos storming through the streets of Melbourne, firing rubber bullets at protesters, or the way that the news has been covered by Australia's mainstream media.
Good evening. On the day we should be enjoying the grand final parade, a far more disturbing spectacle in Melbourne, anti-vax protesters taking their shameful campaign from the city to the suburbs.
That's Channel 9 News Melbourne. But that's not news, folks. That's commentary and propaganda. Listen carefully.
Good evening. On the day we should be enjoying the grand final parade.
So right from the start, they want you to think about what you're missing. You should be enjoying the grand final parade, Melbourne. You're not. You're not because of these bloody protesters. That's what they want you to think. The real reason you aren't enjoying the grand final parade, Melbourne, is that you've chosen to vote for and support a premier that is handling COVID with extreme lockdowns because they can't run your hospital system properly and know that the hospitals probably won't cope with a COVID outbreak. That is why you're not enjoying the grand final parade, or the grand final for that matter. Now, if the mainstream media don't have the guts or ability to tell you that, which is the actual truth for anyone who digs 2 millimeters below the surface, then maybe they could refrain from imposing their own half-baked theories. Oh no. No, that'd be real journalism. That'd be news reporting.
A far more disturbing spectacle in Melbourne, anti-vax protesters taking their shameful campaign from the city to the suburbs.
Again, this isn't news. They're telling you what to think. They're telling you the spectacle is far more disturbing. Is it, Pete? Or is it just that your executive producer's personal opinion tells you to say that? They're telling you wrongly and falsely and deliberately that these are all anti-vax protesters. Some are. Many are just anti-forced vaccination protesters. Many are just anti-lockdown protesters. Many maybe just want the right to go to work. Many are just ordinary Aussies who want their liberty back. One of the protesters at the Shrine of Remembrance on Wednesday has now tested positive for COVID. Channel 9 has already determined that those protesting were a mob and that the police are the real victims here.
One of the biggest concerns is this crowd could be spreading COVID. A man who marched among the mob of 400 on Wednesday was hospitalised hours after storming the Shrine of Remembrance. He was arrested by multiple police officers. They've been made to isolate, depleting an already exhausted force which has turned out in numbers and been assaulted almost every day for a week.
Now look, I'm a conservative. I like the police, normally, when the police are doing real policing and haven't been politicised by a blatantly authoritarian socialist government. The police are victims, most of them. Some of them are loving this power trip, no doubt, but many are not. We know that for a fact. But our good police officers aren't victims of the protesters. They're victims of the Victorian government. A point lost on Martin Foley, Dan Andrews' trusty health minister.
Think about the Victorian police members who have had to put themselves in harm's way to protect the rest of us. Think about those Victorian police members' families.
Indeed. I wonder how long the police rank and file will put up with being used as political pawns by Victorian Labor and the union leadership in that state. And what about the families of workers who've had enough? What about the families of the small business people that have been crushed by COVID lockdowns? The families torn apart across interstate and international borderlines? And I can't help wondering what would have happened if these people were allowed to protest and shown just a little respect, and the police were doing the job they should have been doing, which is to seek to de-escalate violence and de-escalate the protests rather than escalate them and escalate the violence. And what would happen if television propagandists behaved as actual journalists and sought to show all sides of the protest? Everyone knows that every protest has a few nutters that'll start fights. But when you get thousands of people out on the streets, you might want to start listening to your people and asking yourself where you've gone wrong as a government, because they can't all be crazy. But the propagandists won't show you the other side. Pressed for time and eager for eyeballs, the princesses and princes in our commercial TV newsrooms will only show you the few seconds when the fights broke out, over and over and over again. If you want reality, you'll need to reinvest or invest more of your own time and watch the alternative independent media like us and the real Rukshan. Now, the full video is 3 minutes long. The link is in our program notes. Do check out some of the real Rukshan's other work while you're at it. That video's had 100,000 views and almost 2,000 comments. And the most popular comments were these three. Pisces Goddess writes, "Victoria Police, we will never forget. You once had my respect, but never again." Southern Samurai, "As a Victorian Ambo, I'm shocked by Vicpol's behaviour and disgusted in our state and federal governments." And Anthony Donaldson writes, "Much like the entire Victorian approach to COVID, disproportionate abuse of unnecessary additional powers. 52 years of Victorian, moving my family of 5 into state as soon as we can. Disgusted by Vicpol yet again initiating the violence. Shame on you all." So it's a reputational issue. It's a reputational issue for the Victorian Police. It's a reputational issue for our system of justice. It's a reputational issue for our concepts of liberty and our entire society and government. And it's a reputational issue that's going to linger for decades. But it's not just Victoria that's going to see a flight of people and of money from its shores. Australia as a whole is copping a reputation bashing globally. Some of it's a little over the top, but perception is everything, and you can't say that a lot of it isn't deserved. Thanks to Dan Andrews and our federal leadership's failure to rein him in, Australia will suffer long term. Now, Fox News' top-rating Laura Ingraham show spotted the real Rukshan's work and had him on for a chat.
Short months, Australia has gone from one of the world's freest countries to what is essentially a biomedical police state. Things have become so unbearable that hundreds of Aussies took to the streets in Melbourne today.
I know children raising a son, 13-year-olds. I'm not the Let us get back to work. Let us provide for our families.
Here now is the man who shot that footage, independent journalist Rukshan Fernando. Rukshan, what's happened to Australia?
Yeah, Laura, well, that footage was from a couple of days ago, but we're into like the 3rd or 4th day of continuous protests here in Melbourne. And right now, I don't know if you can hear, but there's helicopters whirling above the city of Melbourne. There's riot police on the streets, and they're rounding up construction workers and tradespeople that we commonly refer to as tradies here for voicing their dissent and their concern about mandatory vaccinations, and in particularly those workers in the construction sector who don't want to be vaccinated to keep their job. And it's scenes that we've never seen before in Australia. And as someone that's grown up here my entire life in Australia, I can't believe that I'm seeing this in my state as well.
No, I mean, I saw this video over the weekend of some poor old woman getting pushed aside, pushed down by the rows and rows and rows of police and, I guess, military or security officials. And for a moment, I looked and I said, is this China? I know China's looking very rapaciously at Australia, but it looked more like something at Tiananmen Square than you'd expect from Australia.
That's right, Laura. I mean, look, these are just everyday Australians, everyday Victorians. They're protesting. Right now, the government said, protesting is illegal. You can't be on the street. So the police are using all sorts of tactics and measures against just ordinary working class Australians.
Australia is making China proud. And that footage is, I can't stop watching it. Rukshan, thank you.
The British rapper and podcaster Zuby, who recently fled the UK for the US because of COVID lockdowns, had this to say about the UK and Australia on Fox Nation's Tucker Carlson Today show.
With me, it's like, well, there's nowhere else to go besides literally leaving the whole country, which is bittersweet. It's an adventure, but I don't like the fact that I felt like my hand was forced.
Yes.
That things were going in such a direction where I was like, man, like I don't know. You know, I talk to people who live in all the freedom lovers who are out there in places like Australia right now. It's a bad situation. I mean, you can't leave the country.
Yeah.
I mean, that in itself, it's one thing.
You can't leave the country.
You can't come in. You can't leave. It's gone back to being a penal colony, right?
So why is that better than Cuba? I mean, better beaches? Like what?
This is the thing, and you know, it's also been revealed that a lot of people don't value liberty and freedom, perhaps in the way that we thought that they did, or people claimed to. I think now you're seeing that, you know, I've always had a suspicion that really people value safety and security, or at least the illusion of it, more than they value freedom and liberty. And that's really proven, it's really proven to be the case. I mean, everything that's going on, every government overstep, every bit of authoritarianism or outright tyranny, what's the justification for it? You know, for the greater good, for your health, for your safety. That's always the justification, even if they're clearly going way beyond that.
But it's all...
Yeah, way beyond that. Zuby nails it. Now, with all the attention that new media has been getting, and independent journalists like Real Rukshan and Avi Yemeni, and dare I say it, us at Discernible, the mainstream media are freaking out. How dare Real Rukshan appear on Fox News, damn it? Only we in the left-wing old media get to control the narrative. As soon as anyone gets some profile, they pile on, like a bunch of screaming teenagers. This from someone named Eden Gillespie on Twitter. She's a cub reporter at SBS's online news service, The Feed. Another excellent use of your taxpayers' money, which seems to be rather heavily slanted towards a woke Marxist kind of worldview. Fox has interviewed Real Rukshan, a prominent live streamer who attends anti-lockdown protests. So, carry on. He calls himself an independent journalist, but is notably popular among the anti-lockdown crowd. Wow, not the anti-lockdown crowd. Those nutjobs who want a balanced consideration of personal liberty and freedom in COVID management in a liberal democracy. In his live streams, protesters have chanted his name and offered him donations. Yeah, he's got a fan base. This kid is just hilarious. Second tweet in the thread, please, James. Rukshan claims he isn't accepting donations. He isn't. At the protest, he was praised, while a Channel 7 journalist was attacked by protesters and doused in urine, which I guess is clearly Rukshan's fault. Rukshan's live streams have reached 70,000 viewers, and he's been interviewed by global media, as well as Australia's own 3AW. Oh no. So Real Rukshan isn't a real journalist. Okay, but Eden Gillespie is. Right. So who is this Eden Gillespie? Well, let's have a look at her publicly available LinkedIn profile. It says she graduated from the University of New South Wales with a Bachelor of Media and a major in Journalism and Communications in 2019. Yeah. And in a career spanning all of 5 years, she's had 9 jobs. Some of them are actually paid positions and full-time. Now look, I'm not in the habit of doing hatchet jobs on people. I hate the ad hominem, playing the man and not the ball stuff. But Eden is a fan of that. One look at her vitriol-laced Twitter feed will show you that she's a classic modern millennial lefty. That she can throw a punch or 50. So many opinions for one so young. So I'll refrain from stooping as low as she does and put the hatchet away. But Eden does get special treatment and some advice from a journalistic elder. Although, what's the bet this 20-something doesn't take advice from people older than her too well? Eden, I'm now an independent commentator like real Rukshan. But you can't write me off like you did him, because I've got 10 years experience in real radio journalism and 3 years as a senior reporter at Channel 10, the bastion of facts and accurate journalism under my belt. I've even been news director at a top-rating capital city radio station. And my advice to you, which I realise you will ignore, but maybe some other young up-and-comers out there won't, is 1, stop picking on people. You're way too young and early in your career for that. Number 2, start reading books about political ideologies you don't agree with, so as to broaden your incredibly narrow worldview, if you want to be a proper journalist. Because the last thing Australia needs is another woke child in journalism who mentally never left university. And 3, find someone older than you, preferably a lot older, and ask them to mentor you and show them some respect and some of what your generation have trouble with. It's called humility. I do wish you all the best, but leave real Rukshan alone. He's proven himself to be a better journalist than most real journalists in Australia already. And criticising him for possibly accepting voluntary donations when your salary is paid by taxpayers involuntarily is playing with fire, kiddo. Kids these days, eh? I mean, of course, when I was in my 20s, I wasn't like that. I was worse. But we had grown-ups in the room in those days. You know, at 3AW, my news director was so scary, he literally made me cry one day. He was a lovely bloke. But if you were junior, you knew it. And that was a good thing. And the sexual harassment from the women in that newsroom to the young male journalists was over the top. It was wonderful. No, it was all taken in good fun in those days. These days, the kids are 5 seconds out of uni, a head full of woke garbage and the confidence to be managing director. And the ABC is just full of old woke people from Triple J in the 80s and 90s who haven't found the exit door yet. And why does SBS even have an internet news feed? How is this a good way to spend taxpayers' money? Like our kids need more news channels feeding them woke Marxist ideology in 2021? Give me a break. Of course, if we had a liberal federal government, they'd fix it. Oh wait, we do have a liberal federal government. Nothing like happily funding your own demise, is there? Anyway, I don't know where these kids get their attitude from. Actually, yes, I do. Over 50s lefties, my age group. The grumpy wrinklies. Like this lovely Labor MP who also thought it'd be fun to have a go at Rukshan for no reason at all on Twitter. Joanne Ryan, her name is. She's the member for the Victorian seat of Lalor in the Australian Parliament. And guess what? She's in the Labor Party. And she's the opposition whip. She retweeted young Eden's hatchet job on Rukshan with the comment, "The wedding photographer." Well, yes, Rukshan did used to be a wedding photographer. And do you know why he isn't a wedding photographer anymore, Joanne? Because his business disappeared due to lockdowns imposed by your Labor state colleagues. So he reinvented himself, because that's what smart, motivated achievers do. They don't lie on the couch watching Netflix with their hand out for a government welfare check. They go and make the money that pays the taxes that pays those welfare checks. And if we don't have any small business people being supported, there won't be any welfare checks pretty soon. Small business people also don't get to sit on a $211,000 a year base salary like our federal MPs do. All the way through lockdown, Joanne, like you probably have. Remember that one, battlers of Lalor in Victoria who vote Labor? The election is just around the corner. Lalor is a very safe Labor seat. But maybe, just maybe, it shouldn't be. Anyway, it was actually a really good week for Rukshan. Lots of attention and no doubt clicks and subscribers, and good on him. He deserves it more than anyone. The Age newspaper in Melbourne actually did a little piece on him and was quite positive for the most part. But of course it had to feature some academics and sociologists tisk-tisking and finger-wagging at the far-right influences. So most academics in Australia, you know, today anything right of Chairman Mao in a Lenin costume is considered to be far-right. The Age reports, quote, Deakin University political sociologist Dr. Josh Roos, who studies far-right movements, does not believe Rukshan Fernando's role is passive. His videos have grown him exponentially in the last week. It's an interesting tactic and style. He'll attend these protests, film the violence, yet deny responsibility, Ruse says. His filming of the protest is actually part of the problem. Honestly, can you believe this guy? He films the spectacular and seeks to bring in sympathy for protesters. In that sense, he's building their narrative. Okay, that is, I don't have any words for that one. You know, Channel 9 acting as a PR arm of Victoria Police is just fine, is it, Doctor? There is no difference between Rukshan's camera being there, or Channel 10's, or Channel 7's, or Channel 9's. The protesters will always play up for the cameras, and the cameras all want to get viewers. And they'll particularly focus on the minority of troublemakers and blow that out of proportion. And as for a narrative, everyone's got a narrative. Your insight is not very insightful on this occasion, pal. Now, another academic that the newspaper spoke to, Dr. Francesco Bailo, a lecturer in digital and social media at the University of Technology in Sydney, was actually far more sensible, telling The Age that he doesn't believe the narrative that the movement is driven by the far right. Quote, "I never believe in general the simple explanation, saying that the far right blows some whistle and then you have hundreds of people in the streets. The roots of this, the discontent causing this, is real. People are not being paid, the vaccine mandate. You have an opportunity for many different movements and groups to try to steer this." Thank you, Dr. Bailo. Some sanity and actual intelligence in Australian academia at last. Folks, when are we going to stop with the simplistic narratives? A lot of the people marching in Melbourne, yes, even those who went to the shrine, were good, ordinary people who are hurting. Villainising them and calling them deplorables doesn't work. Remember Hillary? It just drives division in society. Of course there are some troublemaking idiots in there, like the vile mongrel who dared to relieve himself at the shrine. What an absolute pig. But the media commentators making it all about the desecration of the shrine the next day? Well, they seem to be swallowing a distraction, perhaps promoted by the Victorian Police Media Unit. It's an old PR trick. Look over here, this horrible thing that happened. Don't look over here at the fact that we're shooting people. And meanwhile, the left are constantly telling those of us on the right how much more kind, understanding and compassionate they are than we are. I don't see it. On the left, I see people who are far too quick to judge others, far too simplistic in their analyses of current events and social issues, far too simplistic in their analysis of COVID and the response, and far too closed-minded and arrogant. What COVID has shown us is what these kind, compassionate left-wing bureaucrats do when they have power. How fast they'll resort to command and control approaches. Lockdowns, fines, heavy penalties, police brutality, and now firing rubber bullets at their own citizens. That's the left. Our country is crying out for leadership from the centre and the centre-right. But that too is completely lacking because both major parties have gone a bit too left. They both want big government. In the election coming in the next 6 months or so, we need to vote for politicians who say that they will reduce the size of government, remove some of the laws and the thousands of regulations, too many, that we have in Australia, and create a freer, more liberal, more democratic Australia. See you next week. Hi, this is Damian Coory. If you enjoyed this episode of The Other Side Australia, the best way that you can support us is by telling your friends about the show and liking, sharing and subscribing, including hitting the bell on as many platforms as possible. To find us, simply search up The Other Side Australia or Discernible with an A on YouTube. YouTube is the best place to go. When you get to the Discernible platform, the Discernible channel on YouTube, you'll see playlists for the different Discernible shows, and there's a playlist for The Other Side Australia which has all of our most of our past episodes, as well as always the most recent episodes at the top. So that's YouTube, Discernible with an A, DISCERNABLE, and you're looking for the playlist of The Other Side Australia, and you'll find it right there on Discernible. You can sign up for that playlist and alerts on that playlist by just hitting subscribe and the bell, or to all the Discernible content, and you'll catch us every single time. They'll let you know when we put up new content. Now, you can also follow us for the audio show, the podcast show. It's just the audio version of this show on Apple, Spotify, iHeartRadio, all the great audio podcast platforms. We are on all of them. And if you really want to keep in touch and avoid the big tech censors, just send us an email to theothersideost@gmail.com. theothersideost@gmail.com. Ask to be added to the VIP WhatsApp group, and I will send you back a link that enables you to join or unjoin. You have total control the WhatsApp group that we have. Now, the WhatsApp group is a one-way group, so you're not going to get bombarded with people having discussions about things. All we do is send one or two messages or so a week, letting you know that the new show is out with a link to the show. And occasionally we might send a little bit of information, but generally you're not going to get more than 2 or 3 messages on WhatsApp per week if you sign up to our WhatsApp group. So just drop me that email at theothersideost@gmail.com. And I strongly recommend signing up to the Discernible crew as well for the platform, for Matthew's shows, all the other content that we have on Discernible, at discernible.io. Bit of an unusual suffix there, not .com or .org, but it's .io. And it's Discernible with an A. Catch you soon.